is already off to a very jumbled start because we've been trying to go through a different recording service for the last 30 minutes. So we're already very caffeinated, very hopped up. But I am here today to talk to Stacey Simms about this.
Oh, my goodness.
I had to climb on my bookshelf to get it down because I accidentally put it on a shelf that I couldn't reach without a stool. So thank you for giving me morning exercise for that. I appreciate it. But let me make this more formal. I am very appreciative that you have taken the time to talk to me, and then we're going to broadcast this to the children with diabetes community and then share it through our different channels. So thank you for making yourself available. I know this has been chaotic getting me on the line.
This is why I got out of television. And really, we just need to stick to radio. But I really appreciate it, Kerri. Thank you.
My pleasure. And so I want to jump right in because I've already kept so much of your morning already. So just if you could for a minute, just introduce yourself to the community that may not know you already so they can get a sense of who you are, and then we'll get into the book.
Oh, sure. So my name is Stacey. My son, Benny, was diagnosed more than 13 years ago, which is bananas. Time just flies, but he was not yet 2 years old. He was diagnosed with type 1 when he was 23 months. I have an older daughter. Her name is Leah. She is 3 years older than him, although they're 4 years apart in school. And I say that because she's a freshman in college now and he's a freshman in high school. I started a blog about a month after Benny was diagnosed. At the time, I was working as a morning radio show host. I had been a TV anchor and reporter, thus the I hate pictures, because it's all the makeup and the hair and I'm looking at myself like my headphones are so big and do I put lipstick on? And this is not good. I distract myself. But then I started the blog, and then 4 years ago, I started a podcast. And then last year I wrote the book.
That is awesome. And so you've been sharing a lot of your family's experience and your personal experience centered around diabetes, but going right into Stacey Simms, the world's worst diabetes mom. So this title obviously feels a little tongue-in-cheek because you are clearly very involved, clearly clever, and also on top of things that are going on in your kid and your family's health. So why did you call it this?
The book title came about because I had actually been working on a parenting advice book about raising a child with type 1 for a couple of years. And it was really boring. And it was really had been done before. There are so many great books, especially, from a layperson perspective. There are so many great books by medical professionals that can really tell you how to better manage. And I didn't want to just say, here's our story and here's what I think. And I was writing that book, but I wasn't jazzed by it. It was kind of just writing and, old blogs. And my publisher had said, oh, put your old blogs together. We'll just put those out. And I was like, that just didn't sound right to me.
No phrase really resonates like old blogs.
Yeah, I was, ooh. So I was in a Facebook group having a discussion like I still do. I foolishly still go into Facebook groups because I want to help people and I get help too still. And we had a disagreement and it got heated. And I felt strongly that this was an okay way to manage. And the person was so mean and said, you're gonna kill your child. You're terrible parent. Really went there. And I just said, well, I must be the world's worst diabetes mom. And I slammed the computer shut and I walked away and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Not even thinking about the book, but this is who I am. I want to talk about making mistakes. I want to talk about living with less fear. I want to talk about not always being a slave to your beeps. Are you okay? Do you need a juice box?
I have diabetes. Sorry, I'm beeping. It's been one of those days, but everything is fine. Thank you for asking.
But I just wanted to, I realized in that moment that I did have something to say. And it wasn't just about the old blogs. And I went back, I screenshotted the conversation because I thought, well, maybe this guy is bananas and is going to come after me. But I also deleted it because we didn't need my anger out there either. It wasn't just, I was ugly too. So I got past that and I thought, let's talk about all the mistakes I've made because we've made a ton of mistakes. And it's not a question about being a bad parent or a good parent.
Sure.
You're going to make mistakes with your kids, whether they have diabetes or not. And let's use those examples of mistakes to talk about resiliency and confidence. And I think my son is better off for all the mistakes I made.
I hope that applies to parenting outside of the realm of diabetes because I'm not a perfect mom myself. And so it's reassuring to hear that stumbling leads to success, even if it's a modified version of the success you thought you were going towards. So I really appreciate that. And I also like the fact that it's not like, here's how to be perfect by Stacey Simms, because that really puts people on their heels. Like you can't take advice from someone that you have on a pedestal. It's always a lot easier to have a peer-to-peer conversation. And that's how I feel like your book reads through. It resonated for me. And I'm an adult with diabetes, not raising a child with diabetes, but reading your perspectives gave me a lot of insight on maybe conversations that my mom and I never had, or my email just dinged across. Can you see that when it comes across, or is it
No,
just
you're
recording
good.
us?
You're
This
good.
is important to note because these are some weird emails. But I just have a couple notes. I just wanted to look through this. But when I was reading through the book, there's the story of the first night that you guys are home with Benny, and it hit me really hard because I was thinking about my own two kids, and like I said, they don't have diabetes, but I was putting myself in your position, and it's so easy to be the person with diabetes from my perspective, but it is very, very different to be the person who cares just as much, but is like 10,000 feet away for so much of the experience. And so, do you think that it's important to have those stories shared, like stories like yours and stories from adults with type 1, so that we can kind of create an amalgam story sort of thing? Like, why is that important?
I think it's a great question because it's so important to recognize that the two experiences run in tandem, but they are so separate as well, right? We're never really going to separate them, but we
Mm-mm.
can't pretend they're the same. So a person with diabetes is having one experience. A parent of a child with diabetes is having a totally different experience,
Right.
obviously tied together by diabetes. And you've already said, oh, I think it's worse to be the parent. You've implied that by something you've said, which is fine. I mean, I almost every adult with type 1 I know says, oh, my mom, it was so much harder on her.
We're not saying it to make you feel better. We're
No,
saying it
no.
because we believe that's
Yes,
fundamentally the true.
I understand, but I disagree because I'm not beeping and I can walk away from it.
I
But at the
know.
same time, it's not a question of comparing, right?
Right.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm not saying
Mm-mm.
that you're doing that, but I think it's really important that we see these experiences as equally important,
Mm-hmm.
but very different, but then tied together. So telling all of these stories, I'm hopeful that Benny, when he gets a little older, will look back and read it. And he knows the stories. We actually shared that ahead of time.
Right.
We talked about what I could put in the book. But I'm hoping that he'll see it and kind of think, oh, well, that was not my experience,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm glad to know it.
No, of course. And you were saying it's not about comparing them. I think it's about
Right.
making a cohesive story around them. Like my low felt like this, but it looked and felt to my mother like this, and mushing those two stories together gives us a broader experience touch point. And I think that's so important, especially for like a teenage kid who might pick up your book and read it, and when they're in that angsty, angry part of diabetes, and they might be so furious with their parents, to get your perspective on that might help segue a good conversation with their own parents. That's why I don't think this book is just for parents of kids with diabetes. It cross collateralizes the whole community, you know? I don't know. I think that's accurate. I'm going to toot your horn for you that way.
One thing I think is really interesting to talk about is you mentioned like the not perfect parenting thing.
Hmm.
And I think we're under pressure regardless of diabetes as parents, right? You can't win. You really
Nope.
can't. But I also think it's funny when you look at a lot of parenting blogs and parenting writings, it's either I'm a perfect parent and you should aspire to look like this, these perfect Instagram photos or whatever, look
Mhm.
like us, do like us, eat like us. Or you have oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so crazy. Oh, motherhood is so, I'm a mess.
Uh-huh.
Look at my, and I really, that doesn't speak to me either, right?
Are you in that middle lane?
We are smart. We are
Hmm.
strong. We are sometimes a mess. We are sometimes perfect. And I know that sounded like I was making fun. You know what I mean? It's
No.
these
Yeah.
archetypes, especially women we get put into, right? I'm the hard driving success story, or
Hmm.
I'm so clumsy. I fell into my man. I mean, I hate that. So I tried to really, in this book, kind of encapsulate, who I am, but who I
Hmm.
think a lot of other moms are too,
Hmm.
right? Competent, confident, but not having it all together.
Now might be an important part to bring up the fact that I'm wearing normal clothes from the waist up, but sweatpants and slippers from the waist down. So like I think that sort of is the
Me
template for that.
too.
Say me too. There we go. But wait, you had actually skipped ahead to something I wanted to ask you about.
Sorry.
Shoot, shoot. No, that's fine. This is good though.
It's hard
Um,
when you're used to answering the questions.
I know, and I don't normally write my stuff down, but I'm organized today. But yeah, you talked about when you first started sharing your stories and when Benny was home that first night and that sort of stuff. And you used to write about Benny's personal experiences and yours. And as he's gotten older and his experience has become more his, you've said that you've stepped away a little bit from telling his stories and have embraced, I can't describe it for you, but like what's it like to decide to share X in the beginning, and what makes you transition to the Y?
I think it's such an important conversation. It was interesting in the beginning, and I do wish that I'd given my kids just a little bit more privacy by changing their names
Mhm.
or giving them nicknames. The problem for me was I was already on the radio,
Right.
and we had a show where it was mostly political news, but we did talk about our personal lives a little bit. So my listeners knew when I started at that station, I had a 1-year-old daughter. And then when I was working at that station, I was pregnant and then I had a baby and here's Benny in the hospital. It was a different
Yeah.
experience than just blogging. So it didn't really occur to me at the time. And social media, certainly what it is now, wasn't then what it is now. It was a different experience. But when you have a toddler and you have a baby, I mean, even going back, I was careful at the time not to overshare. But as he got older, you realize, people are reading this, people are looking at this. There are only some experiences that I felt comfortable sharing. And it wasn't just the good stuff, right? We shared things that things went wrong. I thought that was important. But I'm on the record and I sound like a broken record. I don't share my son's A1C. I don't
I have that question too. Yeah.
I don't do not share photos of your child in distress, no hospital pictures. I wish I had pictures of him in the hospital when he was diagnosed for me.
Sure.
But, we didn't have our phones with us 24/7 at that point, especially didn't have cameras on them, which sounds so ancient.
I mean, this is what it is, right? Like when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I had to pee in a bucket to test it for sugar. So like things have not a bucket. I mean, let's be realistic about this. Well, but, things have progressed, and with it, the conversation about what to share and not to share. And so, I mean, you talked already about not sharing his A1C. And I think personally, I am on the same page with you about that. No one needs my personal data points because they're mine and they're personal. But there's a broad spectrum of decision-making processes around that sort of stuff. So what made you decide not to do that?
Well, I think, and I'll just put a caveat in there, I think to not mindlessly share. Right.
Okay,
sometimes it makes sense if you're trying to talk through something or get advice or share a situation or say, hey, look at this difficult situation we worked through and now we're celebrating. I mean, just mindlessly is the word I try to use about it. But what changed was when Benny was about 7, I think, I read something by Maura McCarthy, who is a mentor of mine, and she's a longtime blogger, author. I mean, CWD, faculty,
That's right.
I probably saw her speak there and got this information, but she really encouraged me and others to think about it. And once I stopped to think about it, I realized there's no reason for my 7-year-old's health information to be on the internet. I'm not posting my weight and my cholesterol and, my blood pressure. It's the same thing. We don't think about it that way, but it really is. And that once I thought about it, it changed everything for me. And I started sharing more, great endo visit, no changes, everything's on track, or great endo visit. We had a whole conversation about changes we have to make.
Sure.
Because sometimes like bad can be good when you get the information.
I love the finger quotes. Yeah, but I feel like that's an important part of it too, because it's not truly bad or truly good. There's a dialogue.
But the conversations get better when you get away from the numbers.
I agree.
You can have more in depth about how you're feeling and what advice you're looking for and that sort of thing. So I've shared with friends when I've said, oh, I'm upset about this, or can you help me with that? That's different.
Yeah, no, of course, because that's your actual personal life. But broadcasting it to the broader internet is a different decision entirely. So as a kid who grew up with type 1 diabetes, that's my perspective, and yours is parenting a kid who's growing up with type 1 diabetes. How do you feel about, I mean, I see a lot of memes from parents about parenting in general, where they have like the curlers half in their hair and the bathrobe and the coffee cup dangling off of one arm. And they're like, parenting is so exhausting. And that feels universally ha. But when I see that same sort of meme applied to diabetes, like this is what a parent of a kid with diabetes looks like, and they just look bedraggled and rotten and exhausted. And as an adult with type 1, that applies a guilt to my experience that I didn't see coming. And so I'm just curious what you think about things that paint diabetes in a light that maybe they don't realize is shining directly on their kid when parents tell those sorts of stories.
Yeah, it is a great question, because the reality is maybe you didn't sleep that great last night, right? Maybe you were up 3 times treating a low. But
are you talking about me? Because that was my night last night.
Well, I do you have a baby cam still? Because there was a signal in my house. No,
I do.
I'm talking about the parent, right? So if a parent has to do that and then wants to go on Facebook the next day and start talking about how hard it was, I can understand that. But I do think, and my favorite meme about this, and I don't think it started as a diabetes parenting meme. I think it's just a parenting meme, but it's like, an 87-year-old woman. And then it says like, whoa, parenting is hard. I'm celebrating my 23rd birthday tomorrow. Funny. But I do think that you've hit it on the head. That's not a meme I would share about diabetes. I think it's difficult to know where to draw that line. And we don't We don't think, because what we're doing, not to get all psychological, but in doing some research for a recent podcast I was doing, I found a great article about this, and I can send you the link. But when we're sharing things like that, we're looking for likes, right? Because our brain as humans, we need support. We're looking for community. We actually like to get the good brain stuff going, the dopamine or whatever. When you get those likes,
vibe.
Right. But it's real and physical.
Mm-hmm.
And so posting something like that, is going to bring in more of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not made up. It's not fake. It's
not to minimize that feeling at all. No,
it really happens. But there are better ways of doing it, I think. And as you're alluding to, if we as parents of kids with type 1 don't listen to adults with type 1, we miss out on this kind of conversation, because no 7 or 8-year-old is going to say, it kind of hurt my feelings, or I really processed some guilt when you posted that, right? They're not going to say that. They may not even realize it, but we need to be mindful of that kind of stuff. And I think it's fine to have fun and, maybe share that privately. But, I really try hard not to make diabetes the focus of everything and not to show that guilt, because that's just parenting anyway, right?
It's just an added thing.
It is just an added thing. It's like, not to get too far off topic, but when people are freaking out about sending their kids to sleepovers.
Sure.
Right? Because something might happen. When I was in 2nd grade, Jennifer Luckett slept at my house. We had a babysitter. We didn't even have my parents. And she cut her leg on my bed. It was the 70s. So it was like some metal crazy trundle bed. She cut her leg bad enough that we had to go to the ER and get stitches.
Oh, wow.
Okay? How do you prepare for that?
I don't think you do.
You don't. So things happen on sleepovers. Emergencies happen. Parents who say, I'm going to have a sleepover, have to be prepared for weirdness. And to me, diabetes falls under that category. But that's a decision you have to make. And I think it's the same thing with that kind of a meme. You kind of have to make the decision of, there's a difference between everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, which I've been guilty of for a long time. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm good. I don't need any help. I'm fine. And there's a difference between that and, woe is me, everything's terrible, life is like sucks, and oh my God, diabetes is the worst. You gotta find that medium, and you've gotta, at least to your children, I think it's important to not fake it, but be careful about stuff like that.
Sure.
Good reminder.
I like what you said earlier, because I read a lot about mindfulness and being mindful and making sure that you're mindful. But the fact that you've cited mindlessness as a potential alternate to that, like, don't be mindless, don't share mindlessly, consider the course of your actions that you're taking and how it might influence your kid. That is a huge takeaway already for me from this conversation. It doesn't apply just to parenting diabetes. I think it applies to the whole mess. Don't be mindless about the things that you're sharing. I think that's a really, really good tip.
It's funny because I stink at being mindful, right? You're supposed to take your time when you eat and drink your tea and savor and, take a moment. I really don't think I can do that, but I can take an extra 10 seconds and think, do I want to post this photo?
Of course. In a mindfulness exercise once, I was asked to spend 1 minute eating one M&M. And it was a really strange experience. And I'm sure it was really effective, but for me, it made me feel very stressed out. We can get into that later. But
how I do that.
But because we've talked a lot about parenting, and I'm sorry to be going back to my notes here, you talked about an experience where you and your family, or you at least and Benny and Leah, met Nick Jonas, and how this was truly more of a thing for Leah, your daughter, than it was for your son, who is the one who has diabetes. And there was something that you wrote that really stuck with me, because I feel like parenting a kid with diabetes, the parent is acknowledged a lot, which is fantastic. The child with diabetes is acknowledged quite a bit because they become the focal point of that narrative. But the siblings of kids with diabetes end up on this weird purgatory peripheral area, and they're not often acknowledged. And you wrote that at the end of meeting with Nick Jonas, that you had said that diabetes was in our lives, but she, Leah, knew we wouldn't let it take over. She knew she wasn't going to be left behind. And reading that now gives me goosebumps, but reading it then also did too, because it acknowledges a group of people that need just as much support as I do as a kid, as you do as a parent. And when I think about children with diabetes in the organization, the programming really speaks to that as well. It's not just for parents. It's not just for adults with type 1. It's for the siblings. It really embraces the whole family. So because you wrote that awesome line, could you say a little bit more about supporting a sibling?
And the children with diabetes, at Friends for Life, Leah has come. And our summer schedules are always crazy. So it's rare that either one of my kids can come. But I still go. But Leah had a blast, and she didn't really think she would. She kind of came as a favor to me. But
May I ask how old she was when she came?
I was going to say, I think she was 14 or 13. She was a teen. So she was in the teen programming. Sure. And, Benny was still too young to be in that programming. So they were separate.
Yep.
And she knew she was going to get to go to a Disney park, which was amazing, and stay at a fancy hotel with me. And it was great. And I don't think I saw her much. She thought, well, I'm not going to do this. We'll see how it goes. And it was wonderful. But it's really hard. That's one of the few programs that there is for siblings. When Benny was diagnosed, we got this reminder really off the bat, and it did help us set the tone. He was in the hospital on a Saturday. And on Sunday, I had an event that I had planned. And I do talk about this in the book, but it was an ice skating event uptown. So uptown from my house is about 45 minutes.
Okay.
And I was the only link between these two groups. It was a group from near my house and a group from near my work. Well, the skating rink was my work. They sponsored the rink. I didn't work in the skating rink. I was working at a radio station that sponsored the rink. And I knew that somebody could take care of it, but it was going to be difficult.
Sure.
And Leah reminded me, we're still going to go ice skating, right? We're still going to go ice skating because I live in the South. Ice skating is exotic. It really is. I grew up in New York. I'm like, who cares?
Yeah.
She had never been. She likes frozen ice that you walk on. Amazing, right?
Magic of it.
Magic. So I said to my husband, I'm like, we're going. He's like, heck yeah, go take her. And he stayed at the hospital. And it was the day after my not yet 2-year-old was diagnosed. And I'm thinking, is this the right decision? Is this this is the world's worst diabetes, Mom, because here I am leaving the hospital. But as soon as I got outside, I knew it was the right thing. And that was the day that we said, we can't let this take over our lives. So you do have to be careful. I say this not to judge, but just again with that mindlessness and that mindfulness.
Sure. Yeah.
If you have signs in your house that are like, in this house we're blood sugar fighting, ketone checking, whatever it is, like those signs people have in their kitchens,
ice skating.
Right. No, but I mean, if they're all diabetes related,
of course, yeah.
You have to be kind of careful unless you also have ice skating, hockey playing, unless you want to have a litany of everything your family does. I'm mindful of how many T-shirts do I actually wear that say diabetes stuff on them all the time, and making sure I have stuff from my daughter's programming, and frankly from Benny's programming that's not diabetes related.
Sure, of course, yeah.
It's that kind of little thing I think that siblings really pick up on. Like if you name your dog or your cat or your goldfish after diabetes stuff, it's a family pet. I mean, if it's a diabetes alert dog, that might be different. I just think these are things that as siblings we kind of forget. They're always watching and they're tallying. And you have to be honest with them that diabetes gets more attention. But with Leah, just having the conversation over and over again really helped. I mean, when she was 15, she and I had a great conversation about it. And she said, I was really upset about it. And now I get it.
Wow.
It was amazing. Amazing. She probably is back to being upset about it now. But it was great for
you guys can talk about it is really nice, because a lot of times that animosity isn't voiced and nobody has any areas to sort of air their concerns. And so it's good that you give her space. And like we had mentioned at Friends for Life, people have that space to get that stuff out there.
Oh, yeah. I'm the over-communicating mom. They're like, enough. Enough.
Stop talking to me. But we've talked about community. We've talked about sharing. We've talked about Facebook and the pluses and minuses of that sort of stuff. And it led me to the story that you had written about Benny losing his insulin pump. And then after that, which I think is an amazing discussion about the cost of supplies and how even small children are mindful of the cost of things. And we'll get back to that in a second. But after that story, you had mentioned places to find support for when you have gaffes like that or you have issues like that. And I would love some perspective from you on, as a parent, whittling down this massive diabetes online community that we have access to a manageable size that kind of caters to what people might be looking for. Like, do you have advice for someone who's just jumping in and saying, there's so much, how do I find what's best suited for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing to do is, if you're already online, where do you like to be? Right? Do you like Twitter? Do you like Facebook? Do you like Instagram, Pinterest? You got to find your house. Like, where do you like to live? And then once you're there, find your people. And let's talk about Facebook, because that's probably the biggest for parents. I know Instagram is a lot bigger in the last couple of years, but Facebook groups are still really, really active for parents. And my advice there is, be careful, again, not to turn your Facebook into diabetes book, which is what happened to me. I am in 55 Facebook groups about diabetes. Now, granted, I joined Facebook in 2008. So I've been around for a while. You're horrified.
Well, it was the look on your face. It wasn't like, I'm so proud to be in 55 or so horrified to be in 55. It was a real mashup of the both emotions.
And that's exactly how I feel. Yeah. So, because I'm like, I want to be here and I like the vibe of this group and I like the information in this group and I like to put my podcast in this group. But what I did was I muted the majority of those groups. And that has been phenomenal. If you're not familiar, as you're watching or listening, it's very easy to do. You can just mute the group. I think you unfollow the group, might be the technical term, but you don't leave the group. So that way, when you want to dip into those waters, it's up in your time.
Sure.
And my Facebook feed went back to being my real life, which is my friends, the stuff, the dumb things I follow, and a little bit of diabetes. And then I can jump back in whenever I want to. And Facebook, of course, will find you. You know, if there's something interesting, we'll put it right in your face. On Twitter, if you're there, which is just a crazy place to be, the best, just all the politics and mess, but DSMA is still, you know, Diabetes Social Media Advocacy is still the best hashtag on Twitter. They still do the Wednesday night chats. Those are wonderful. Instagram, I'm struggling with just a little bit, only because I like the realness of the stories and things that people I know put out. But I've been trying to follow more people, and I'm not knocking anybody. You're all wonderful and beautiful. But I have talked to 2 influencer type people, and I complimented one of them. I'm like, that was such a beautiful shot, and your hair looked so good. And, you know, and she said, Stacey, I have a hair person and a photographer. You're a diabetes person. Like, what? If I had a hair person and a photographer, I could change the world.
I'd be wearing pants.
I'd be wearing pants. I would have better headphones because wearing Benny's Beats, I thought these would be smaller. You have cute little earbuds. I don't know. I have no earbuds. I have studio cans that are like this big. I thought would be even worse. Cans are, we have all the headphones in the biz. But I just, you know, I can't do the influencer thing. So you, as you listen, you might love that. That might be your thing. Go for it. But I think you have to find where you live, where you feel comfortable. Where's your vibe? And then you'll find your people, but don't let it get overwhelming. And if you find somebody that wants to call you the world's worst diabetes mom,
screenshot it.
Screenshot. Walk away, unless you have a book. But I mean, really, it's not worth the argument. If someone tells me I'm wrong, I'm not going to change their life probably. Maybe I can help. I've got a good discussion going in my local group right now about finding babysitters. There are people who will say, my local diabetes, I run a Facebook group for parents in the Charlotte area. I started a few years back, and it's been amazing. And there's a discussion right now, and people are like, I will never be able to leave my children alone. Yes, you will. And here's how. And so we're trying to help each other kind of get past that.
That's nice, though. I feel like the internet is fantastic, and it's done such a great job of connecting people who don't live anywhere near one another. But when it comes right down to human connection that people really crave in those moments of need, that hyper-local stuff is huge. You can recommend a babysitter to me, but they're of no use to me in Rhode Island. But for the people that live down the street from you, they can go and call that person, and they can actually hire them out. And that says a lot, too, about the diabetes community, how willing people are to give those really hard-earned resources and to share it with their people. That's beautiful.
It is absolutely amazing. And you think, I mean, I know this is a CWD interview, but the first thing that comes to my mind is going to that conference or any of the conferences that they put on. I don't even worry about what I'm packing. I mean, sure, I hope I pack everything Benny needs, but if he needs anything, somebody's got it, and they'll help you at 2 a.m. You know, it's just an amazing community. And I don't know, I think, especially locally, knowing that we might see each other at the grocery store, like that Facebook group is probably one of the nicest groups I'm in.
People have to own what they say, right? Because they might see you over avocados.
I know who you are.
Right. So we've run through the questions that I had structured for the book in my preparation, but is there anything else that you feel like it would be really pertinent to share with specifically the CWD audience?
One of the things I've learned just doing the podcast and now on this book tour that I've been on this year, it's just fascinating as the technology gets better and better. And, you know, Benny's on the new software from Tandem, and, you know, there's all sorts of great stuff coming out. It's interesting how the change from 13 years ago seems to be almost more fearful. And it's not that, it's not so much that people are afraid to let their kids do things. It's that they're afraid to let their kids get out of range. And I think I'm seeing that a little bit among adults as well. Now, my adult view is skewed to a lot of the influencers and people that, you know, sometimes I see in person. But that's another thing with the world's worst is, you know, talking about staying in range was never part of my repertoire. It was like, go play football. And we'll figure out how to put diabetes in the picture. But I'm learning that a lot of people we have amazing technology. It's changed so much just in the last few years. And we need to encourage each other to use that technology to live fuller lives rather than use the technology to post graphs. And it's just remarkable to even say that to a parent who is diagnosed. I mean, I've got to watch my language.
We'll go back to that in a second, but you're right. You are right. My mom used to say we. It was a we thing, just it was a different version of we. So that's a very fair statement.
I think with a 15-year-old too, I'm really trying to change my language over. It's hard.
But you still love him. So I mean, his health is your mental well-being, right? I mean, there's no separation there. Sorry to go on a tangent.
I know. Well, this is a great discussion. This could be for another time too, and we'll talk more in person. But I think it's his diabetes, and it's the family is affected, but it's his. So that's what I mean. And I completely lost my train of thought.
Oh boy, I was with you too, but then I started picturing
we were talking about ranges and staying in range and things like
using technology to your benefit.
Right.
Sorry.
I get crazy about the language right now. It's really hard for me to change over. But I just feel like we're finding that the state of the art. I mean, I know what I was saying. In my community, we have a pilot program where your child is diagnosed and they give you a Dexcom in the hospital. Then you go home. Mm-hmm. So it sounds great. But the problem is that unfortunately, I don't know that there's enough education, and I'm not slamming the CDEs and Dexcom here. It has nothing to do with that. It's just that diabetes is hard.
Sure.
And so if you see everything from the beginning, maybe you get used to that, but then the Dexcom comes off and they don't want to go to school, or they don't want to go to the water park, or they don't want to go on that field trip or that overnight because they've never been without the Dexcom.
Sure.
And we're seeing more and more and more of that, where I would be like, oh, I hope your inset's still on. Pick you up in an hour. But you learn resiliency. You learn stuff like that. Yes, the worst. Well, and that's a real story. When Benny was 3, we were at a water park.
I saw that's in here.
Yeah, I think so. His inset came off and his blood sugar went really high because he was terrified of shots and insets at the time. And I thought, you know what? This is going to be an hour or two. He's going to be fine in the long term. My endo says stuff like this is okay as long as we don't do it a lot. And maybe the running around will bring him down. It didn't. So he got in the car. He was 400. We changed his inset. We got him home. He was fine. No ketones, blah, blah. But in my local group, someone had posted, my kid's Dexcom came off. I'm not sending her to the water park. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
We've got to. Right. We've got to use this stuff to live better, not let it restrict us. Long way of getting to that point. And that's really where I think I am right now because, the technology is fantastic, but your stuff's going to fall off. Things are going to fail, But
you have to continue on. It's that whole life after diagnosis thing.
So it's been a long time. Oof. And he got his permit this year. I can't believe it.
Oh, and then you get to write about driving with diabetes, which is a book unto itself. So we'll start. Yeah,
the book pretty much stops in 6th or 7th grade. So I'm not going to say that I'm an expert at high school yet because I've only had one kid go through and she didn't have diabetes. So we'll see.
You did meet Nick Jonas that one time, so there is that part kind of coaching through. And so you have just been so generous with your time and your perspectives, and I really, really appreciate it. And if you could just do me one solid real quick and let people know where they can find you online and where they'd be able to pick up a copy of your book. And obviously we'll be including links to that, in all the notes that are around this video, but hearing it from you is great.
Oh, thank you so much. I think the best place to go is the podcast website, which is diabetes-connections.com. And then from there, it'll link to every place else, the book, the podcast, the blog, the blah, blah, blah.
And so what's the actual URL for that?
Diabetes-connections.com.
Perfect.
And I would love to do a book giveaway.
Oh, we would love to have a book giveaway.
So I can give away, let's do this. Let's do a paperback and let's do an audiobook. Perfect. Because the audiobook was really fun and interesting to do. If you ever do an audiobook, it's quite the experience. It's like reading a dramatic play. It was very strange, strange. Totally different experience than writing it. But we can do a paperback giveaway and then the audiobook. That would be my pleasure. Thank you.
That would be amazing. And I will put a link to the giveaway page in this video and on the webpage. But Stacey, thank you so much for your time, for your perspectives, for what you've given to the diabetes community, and just being my friend. I appreciate that.
Thank you for giving me an excuse to put lipstick on today.